Welcome to KR Studio. Today, we are excited to introduce to you an incredibly thrilling story. SS class martial artist Reborn after 100 years in the form of a child, protecting his clan from extinction. If you enjoy the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to support us. Let's dive into the story now. Enjoy the journey with us. Episode 1 begins. They would not. Even if they did, Chung Myung couldn't. It took everything he had left to stop the rage from stealing his rationality. The heavenly demon's pale, empty eyes opened to gaze into the blue sky. Mount Hua Sect. 3 words spilled from his lips. The words eternally inscribed on Chung Myung's heart now emerged from the demon's mouth. How unfortunate, disciple of Mount Hua Sect. If only you could get out of here, you could boast of your achievements. Shut your disgusting mouth. You can still be proud of your actions. With the help of countless people, your sword finally reached my body. Shut up. Chung Myung's stomach churned just from hearing the name of his sect from that wretched mouth. How unfortunate. The heavenly demon was dying. Even as the greatest demon in all of time, he cannot survive his Dantian breaking and his organs being ruined. Terminal lucidity, his appearance was nothing more than his last gasps of life. But why? Why did a dying man seem so relaxed? Chunma was incomprehensible to Chung Myung. If I were given just one more day, I would have truly become a being worthy of the name Heavenly Demon. This is fate as well. Chung Myung gripped the sword he'd pulled out of his shoulder. The sharply forged blade cut his palm. One step, another step. At the end of a long and terrible war, Chung Myung limped towards the Heavenly Demon. Remember this, disciple of Mount Hua Sect. Chunma's eyes seemed devoid of emotion, even as Chung Myung approached. This is not the end. The demons will return, and when that happens, the world will be conquered by the demons. The demons can never be stopped. The heavenly demon's head fell to the ground. Chung Myung crushed the head of the heavenly demon, eyes still open. It's worse. The war was over. The world would remember their victory. But Chung Myung knew there was no victory here. No one won this war. Finally, Chung Myung no longer had the strength to stand. His inevitable death was coming. Chung Myung raised his head to the sky. Even after such bloodshed, the sky was still blue, as if indifferent to the happenings of Earth. What will happen to the Mount Hua Sect? Everyone who climbed the mountain was dead. Even if anyone had survived, they were probably on their last breaths. No clan had suffered as much as Mount Hua Sect. Sayong Moon, I told you. Don't give your all in every task, he'd said. Now Mount Hua Sect would be buried on this mountain. All the disciples had followed their masters to death. All that was left were the children, who knew nothing about Mount Hua Sect. And regret. It was regret. Was there any meaning to what happened? Did the spilled blood of Mount Hua Sect mean anything? I don't know anymore. Sahyung Jang Chung, Myung fell onto his side. His pure white robes, painted with a 5-leaf plum blossom, splayed out before his eyes. Innocent death. A lonely end, with no witnesses. The great plum blossom sword saint of Mount Hua Sect was dying like a dog. But your death was better than mine, because there was someone to weep for you. Chung Myung wept for them. I'm sorry, Sahyung Jangmun. Chung Myung's vision faded. If he had devoted a little more of his time to training, would he have been able to save at least one person? If he had listened to his teachers and their scolding? If he had truly obtained the Mount Hua sword instead of the Plum Blossom sword? No regrets. But it was all regret. All he had left was regrets. And worries for the sect. Plum blossoms are meant to fall, and after the cold winter comes spring. Mount Hua. The 13th disciple of the great Mount Hua sect, the Plum Blossom Sword Saint, Chung Myung, who slayed the heavenly demon at the summit of the 100,000 mountains of the heavenly demon sect, drifted into eternal sleep. This short anecdote was his only legacy. The 13th disciple of the Mount Hua sect, one of the greatest third-generation swordsmen, the Plum Blossom Sword Saint, Chung Myung. After defeating the heavenly demon and ending his reign of chaos, Chung Myung breathed his last on the summit of the heavenly demon sect's mountain. Hundreds of years passed, and he was revived as a child. But what was that? Mount Hua sect has fallen? What kind of bullshit is that? Was he supposed to just live his life knowing that? Fallen? Who said that? That doesn't matter. The plum blossoms fall? After a cold winter, spring comes, and the plum blossoms come into full bloom once again. But before the Mount Hua sect returns, I need to be there first. Even if it's in ruins, there has to be something left there. Ugh, those people in there. And so began the struggle of the Plum Blossom Sword Saint, Chung Myung, to save the fallen Mount Hua sect. A dream. No, he didn't know if it was a dream or a memory or a hallucination as he danced on the edge of death. He didn't know if he was already dead, dying, or still alive. All he could see was the past. Childhood memories, his appearance from when he first entered the Mount Hua sect, the scenes of training with Sahyung, the time he'd fled the strict sect rules and gone to see the world. Before a warrior, you are a practitioner. You must realize that power without ethics is just violence. Nagging. Constant nagging. It bored him. While he was a disciple of Mount Hua sect, he didn't fully follow the teaching. Despite his natural talent, which earned him the title of Plum Blossom Sword Saint, he was but a mere beginner in the Mount Hua sect. Why didn't he realize earlier? Even when the teachings didn't make sense, even when he felt out of place, everything that made him him, he owed solely to the Mount Hua sect. That was why he admired the sect so much. He realized too late for regrets. If only he'd paid a little more attention to the teachings, if only he was a little bit stronger, he might have been able to change that bitter ending. If only he... Do you regret your decisions? Chung Myung heard the soft voice of Sahyung Jang-moon, his father, his older brother, his family. This man was Chung Myung's goal. He wanted to follow him until the very end, but it was too late for that too. Yes, I regret it. I regret it so much, Sahyung. There is no need for regret. His voice exuded warmth. It is the Mount Hua sect after all. Sahyung. It seemed to Chung Myung that Sahyung was chuckling, forever warm and benevolent, because it is the Mount Hua sect. Tak! Even then, puck! Huh? What? It hurts! My head. I don't get it. What kind of pain is this? Is this what it feels like when your limbs are cut off? Heavenly demon? Is that bastard not dead yet? Chung Myung instinctively raised his hand to protect his head. If he wasn't dead yet, these attacks would finish him off for good. Heavenly demon? But the voice that answered him wasn't the heavenly demon, but a thick, sniveling voice he didn't recognize. Huh? When he opened his eyes, the face was equally unfamiliar. A beggar? Beggar. A beginner. Judging by the knot tied around his waist, he just started. A beggar among beggars. The beggar with the grumpy, scruffy face eyed Chung Myung. What is it? He couldn't understand what was happening. Heavenly demon, yeah, right. The beggar's face flushed red with irritation. You lazy bum, still sleep talking. Everyone else has gone off to beg, but you're still here sleeping like you did something great. Yeah, do I make you laugh, huh? The beggar hefted his bamboo stick. Hold on, is this kid threatening me right now? So that's how it is. Huh? The beggar was startled by Chung Myung's sudden smirk. It was an odd situation, but he didn't feel like he needed to bother with context. Just who was Chung Myung, after all? He handily ranked among the top 3 of all the numerous swordsmen in the world. People praised his sword style as the true essence of Mount Hua sect and dubbed him the Plum Blossom Sword Saint. The 2 other great swordsmen weren't worthy of being his opponents. Even the heavenly demon, in his final moments, acknowledged Chung Myung's swordsmanship. Disciples and sect leaders alike bowed before him. But this beggar was making a threat? A threat! Huh? Are you laughing now? Look here, kid. Look here. I'm struggling to understand the situation, but for starters, you can put that thing down. Ha! Ha 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 ha! Ha 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 ha! The beggar could only laugh. Chung Myung scowled. How dare he react to him like this? And then the beggar smacked Chung Myung with his bamboo stick. Huh! Chung Myung was dumbfounded. How dare a mere beggar do something like this, knowing who Chung Myung was? No matter what happened, he was going to fix this beggar's attitude before the day was up. First, he had to stop that baton. Chung Myung raised his right arm. What? Huh? Slow? Why were his arms so slow? The baton was fast, but why were his arms reaching for it so slowly? It made no sense. With his speed, he should already be holding that stick. Ah, maybe it was because of his injuries? Then all he had to do was move on to his guts. Huh? What's that? On the edge of his vision, he saw a small hand appear, moving towards the baton at a snail's pace. Too slow and too short? Huh? Hands that small couldn't stop it. This wasn't going to work. The stick landed squarely on Chung Myung's head. Chung Myung collapsed to the ground, convulsing. all of his thoughts were driven away by the skull-splitting pain. Kwa! Chung Myung clutched his head and rolled over. Even his arm being ripped off hadn't hurt like this. You bastard! The beggar laid into him in earnest. Situation? Understand the situation? I'll do that, but I'll make sure you understand the situation first. If you go crazy, you go crazy! Stupid bastard. Did the heat rot your brain? The medicine for heat is getting hit, you bastard. Ack! 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 You crazy beggar! Stop right now, if not ack! Die! Die! It hurts! Ack! Chung Myung's cries changed little by little as he was beaten. You bastard. I won't let this go. I'll make sure to rip you. Stop! Stop it now, please, you jerk! Ack! Ack! Why are you hitting me? Ack! You beggar! Ah! Ack! Sorry. The whipping continued with no remorse. Save! Smack! Spare me! As if to tell him there were no free second chances, Chung Myung was immediately beaten to a pulp. He hurt my pride. Chung Myung pulled out the piece of cloth he'd jammed into his nose. Ah! Ah! The moment he saw the red stains, Chung Myung's face fell. A nosebleed. Not even a nosebleed from internal injuries, but a nosebleed from being beaten. How did that even make sense? It wasn't just the nosebleed. Nothing had made sense since he'd opened his eyes. To say nothing of his bruised eyelids, it felt like nowhere on his body was left untouched. Beating someone that thoroughly had to be something of an art form. If someone hadn't stopped him, he would have just kept going. Had he ever been hit like this in his entire life? Despite all the pranks he'd pulled off in the famously strict Mount Hua sect, he had never been beaten this badly. To suffer such humiliation for the first time at the hands of a beggar. I am going to mess him up. That bastard. I'll tear him down. The anger and irritation roiled inside him. Chung Myung laid on the ground. If he acted on a whim, he would only hurt his battered body. No, rather than that. Chung Myung heaved himself up and stared into the river. An unfamiliar young face greeted him. When Chung Myung contorted his face, the young man did too. When Chung Myung sighed, the young man did too. How did this happen? Why was there a different kid's face in the water? No, it was a nice face. The change in his face didn't bother him. After all, the younger the better, no? But it was too young, although better younger than older. Besides, no matter how much he compared them, this face was a lot more charming and handsome than the old Chung Myung. He had no complaints about this new face. But he was dissatisfied with the fact that his body was younger too. Short. The limbs were short, not because he was naturally short or something, but because he was a child. Even worse, he was all skin and bones. Even now, he was too tired and hungry to lift a hand. Ah, whatever. So, in summary, this means I'm alive. Maybe I wasn't appropriate. No matter how hard he looked, this kid looked nothing like the Plum Blossom Sword Saint, Chung Myung. The Sword Saint was gone. His soul and all of his memories now resided in the body of a child beggar. This must be a devil's work. Or maybe it was Buddhist reincarnation? Had he known this beforehand, he would have joined the Shaolin instead of the Mount Hua sect. He wondered if the heavenly demon had used some kind of disgusting magic on him. But if he could perform such feats, he would already be ruling the entire world. Chung Myung didn't really care what had happened, but he had to admit that everything around him was real. This was neither dream nor fantasy. His entire body throbbed with pain. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. Nothing will change if I keep sitting around and thinking about it. First, I need to figure out what's happening and what exactly happened. Chung Myung hopped up and ran to the beggar's tent. Or he tried to run at least. Cook! Within a couple of steps, he fell. You beat me hard, you bastard! Chung Myung's eyes rolled angrily. No matter what happens, I'll make sure to pay you back for this. Death wasn't about to fix his dirty personality. This. Teeth clenched hard enough to shatter any moment, fists tight enough to draw dark red blood, trembling and convulsions that couldn't be controlled, anger enough to turn his hair white red. Everything was red. Everything before his eyes was stained scarlet with blood. The lush green mountain peak was stained blood red. Its very nature was swept away in a single day. Death. All that was left was death. What purpose did all this bloodshed serve? Chung Myung clawed at the hilt of the sword embedded in his shoulder, drawing out the broken length of the Plum Blossom sword. His left arm was gone. Only the torn scraps of his sleeve flapped in the wind. His legs were unwounded, yet he could barely move. His stomach gaped open with a hole the size of an infant's head. And yet, Chunmyung couldn't feel the pain. The pain of his body was nothing compared to the turmoil in his heart. Sahyung Jangmun. He discovered the discarded corpse of Jangmun of Mount Hua sect. Why was it so unfair? Why were the dead unable to even close their eyes? Sajay Chunggong's bisected body haunted him. Sajil's, everyone was dead. All of Mount Hua sect's best and brightest, who had promised to climb the mountain together, to safeguard their territory, to spread their names far and wide, had departed to a place from which they could not return. And their Sajils followed them. Chunmyung clenched his teeth. Theirs was a noble sacrifice. Their death was just and glorious. But who would dare praise their deaths? Who would dare? Chunmyung's gaze locked onto the perpetrator, the one who had roused his unfathomable rage. The demon from the skies, the leader of the heavenly demon sect, the heavenly demon. The sight of this despicable man sat cross-legged in the sea of blood and gore evoked strange emotions in Chunmyung. Even in this hellish scene, the heavenly demon appeared supremely serene. No, serenity didn't suit him now. Dozens of swords pierced his body, and 2 spears pierced his stomach. Everyone had spent their lives to topple that demon. The battle between the final squad, consisting only of the elite of the sects, and the heavenly demon ended in annihilation. Was it satisfactory? Would the dead rest peacefully? You've been asking for a while now. Do you know who the heavenly demon is? You were mumbling about the heavenly demon earlier too. Why are you suddenly looking for him? Answer me first. Of course I know him. Everyone knows. He was the leader of the heavenly demon sect who was defeated 100 years ago. What? Boss. Cho Sam shot forward and grabbed Gu Chil by the collar. 100 years have passed since the heavenly demon was slain? 100 years? Does that really mean a century has passed since then? A century? That's right. Seems like Cho Sam got hit real hard. Tell me the truth. Don't even think about lying. What good would come out of lying to you? Gu Chil pulled Cho Sam off of him. Soon, Cho Sam's freed hands were scratching furiously at his head. He's gone mad. There was no other explanation after seeing that. He wasn't confused or rattled by the beating. He'd just lost his mind. Gu Chil had never seen someone's face express so many shades of flustered. 100 years, you say? Do you want me to say it again? I need to head back. Chunmyung raised his head to the sky. He thought that seeing the clean blue sky would offer him some kind of comfort, but all he could see was the black ceiling of the tent. It was as dark as Chunmyung's mood. 100 years have passed since then? Gu Chil snapped. It's not like you're old or something, so why do you keep repeating the same thing? It's been 100 years. The sects had a big fight with the heavenly demon on top of the 100,000 mountains and took his head off. Right, it was 100 years ago. I get it. That was why he was so depressed. The guy who thrashed Chunmyung earlier seemed like he was high-ranked. In that sense, the guy in front of him now could also be higher-ranked than Cho Sam. In the Beggars' Union, was it? Unfortunately, it wasn't anything great. It was practically impossible for the Beggars' Union to feed and shelter all of their people. It was said that the union took in all beggars, but their funds were limited. Most of the Beggars' Union were plain street beggars. The higher-ups gave them numbers for names, and their clothes had no knots. Roaming on the streets, these beggars would have a better idea of what happened in the world of martial arts than any practitioner. Gu Chil's words were reliable. Huh. Crazy. 100 years, huh? Everything would have changed. Now it was just a matter of accepting he'd been reincarnated into the body of another child. But couldn't I have just been reborn right after my death? After 100 years, everyone who knew Chunmyung must be dead. That aside, all the people he'd known died on top of the horrible mountain. He was all alone. No matter how twisted things can get, this is just too much. Then, the Mount Hua. Ah! Hold one, the Mount Hua sect. When Cho Sam hopped up from the floor and started shouting at him, Gu Chil wasn't even surprised anymore. Mount Hua sect? What happened to the Mount Hua sect? What do you mean? What happened to the Mount Hua sect? Mount Hua? Yes. What's Mount Hua? Huh? Chunmyung boggled at him. He didn't know Mount Hua? A beggar didn't know? Come on, don't play with me. What's the current situation of the Mount Hua sect? Mount Hua sect? Gu Chil tilted his head. He didn't know? Really? About Mount Hua sect? It's one of the 9 great sects, Mount Hua sect. You don't know about it? Ha, you... One of the 9 great sects? What nonsense are you spouting? There is no Mount Hua sect in the 9 great sects. There isn't. Shaolin Temple, Wudang Clan, Diankong Sect, Qingcheng Sect, Kongtong Sect, Southern Island Sect, Ame Sect, Southern Edge Sect, Kunlun Sect, and the Beggars Union. There are 10 now. So Southern Island Sect? Those good-for-nothing bastards are in the 10 great sects? No, that doesn't matter. Then Mount Hua sect isn't one of them? Gu Chil sighed. Cho Sam only heard what he wanted to, no matter what he said. Gu Chil's patience was wearing thin. Mount Hua sect isn't a part of the great sects? No, that could be possible. But you don't know Mount Hua sect? Even when a rich man becomes poor, he can last for 3 years with his luxuries. But you, a mere beggar, don't know about the Mount Hua sect? Calling him a beggar didn't really capture the consequences of what he said. Well, he could starve to death. Does that make any sense? Chung Myung shook Gu Chil by the shoulders. Any sense at all? You really don't know Mount Hua? Mount Hua? Mount Hua sect? Mount Hua. Gu Chil's could feel a headache setting in. Right! Mount Hua. Come to think of it, Gu Chil tilted his head. I remember hearing there was such a sect in the Shanxi province. Yes, that's right, Mount Hua in Shanxi. Chung Myung's eyes were wide. From what I know, it's doomed. What? Chung Myung's heart stopped. I don't know if there was a Mount Hua sect in the Great Sects or not, but I heard stories about how their elite warriors were killed in the war with the Heavenly Demon. I don't know for sure. If you want to know more, ask the others. What did that mean? Mount Hua sect has fallen? Mount Hua? The Mount Hua sect? This beggar feeding me lies. Gu Chil turned his gaze upwards. Even when he told the truth, Chung Myung just cursed him. This was why Gu Chil hated helping people. No, not a chance. I can't believe that. Chung Myung shoved Gu Chil away and jumped to his feet. I need to go and see for myself. Ha! Gu Chil shouted at his back. If you don't come back by dinner in the evening, Wang Cho will kill you for real this time. Don't waste your time with needless things and get back to work. But Cho Sam just left. What is that bastard going to do now? Gu Chil shook his head, absolutely baffled by the change in his behavior. Huh, was this the face of a merchant who'd lost his entire fortune? That was certainly what Chung Myung's face looked like. When he thought about it, with all the disciples of Mount Hua killed in the battle with the Heavenly Demon, a decline in power was inevitable. During that time, they could have been pushed out of the great sects. But no matter how hard he racked his brains, how could Mount Hua be pushed out and the Beggars' Union come into the great sects in just 100 years? How did that make sense? How could beggars, who knew nothing of martial arts, be included? Somehow, the beggar he talked to didn't know, so Chung Myung went asking. But no matter who he grabbed, the result was the same. Mount Hua? Are you talking about the mountains over there? What about it? Mount Hua sect? Did Mount Hua have a martial arts school? I've never heard of such a sect. How dare a beggar touch my sleeve? Do you want your arms cut off? Let go of my sleeve this instant. Ah, not that last one. No one knew, not a single one. This makes no sense. How did Mount Hua sect turn out this way? There would always be numerous famous sects, but none would be as renowned as Mount Hua sect. It would be a bit of an exaggeration to say that all of the most famous swordsmen come from Mount Hua. Still, no one would disagree that Mount Hua was one of the 3 most famous, along with Wudang and Namgung. But people didn't know it existed? There was one positive response, at least. Mount Hua sect? I think I've heard of it. Weren't they famous in the past? From what I heard, they slew the Heavenly Demon and then collapsed. Are they still there? Collapsed? The Mount Hua sect? What kind of bullshit was he spouting? It would be more realistic to say that the Imperial Palace burned down and the Emperor fled. Mount Hua sect has fallen. Mount Hua sect. Maybe I should be glad it's me who was resurrected. Chung Myung recalled the strange expression Sa-young Jang-moon wore in his last moments. If he were alive to hear this news, he would have vomited blood and died again. No. Chung Myung leapt from his seat. I need to see it with my own eyes. Mount Hua sect had existed for hundreds of years, no matter how horrible a state it was in. He had to see it. I'm going to Mount Hua. His blue eyes blazed with passion. This was the moment the butterfly's wings birthed a tidal wave. No matter how I look at it, he seems to have gone mad. Gu Chil gazed seriously down at Chung Myung. Did all the beating drive him mad? He got hit a little harder than usual. Although Wang Cho was usually a little excessive, he'd beaten Chung Myung like he was trying to teach him a lesson. Even getting attacked by a dog wouldn't mess him up this bad. The people who normally tried to stop him didn't even bother today, seeing how Wang Cho had absolutely manhandled Chung Myung. Gu Chil wasn't surprised. So what you're saying is, I'm a beggar? Was he beaten on his head or his body? A beggar, asking if he was a beggar. What madness was this? Gu Chil was certain this guy had turned weird. No, he'd turned horrifyingly weird. He normally slacked off, so Gu Chil knew that one day he was going to get a real beating. It was just bad luck that today was the day. That was the iron rule of the Beggars' Union. If you don't find food with your own hands, you either die a dog's death, starve to death, or get beaten. Normally, people would come back to their senses after their beating. Normally. Instead, the complete opposite was happening in front of Gu Chil. Is it true? Am I really living in a place like this? It can't be true. Are you blind or what? Huh? It shouldn't be hard to figure it out by looking at what you're wearing. Chung Myung lowered his eyes. He saw all kinds of fabrics and rags. It should have been normal clothing, but it was rags. Any normal person would nod their head and go back to work, but not Chung Myung. Don't I have a name or something? Since when did beggars have names? Gu Chil heaved a sigh. Just a crude one. You're Cho Sam. Sounds just like a beggar's name. Look, even his name was poor. To be a beggar. This kind of beggar. The other beggar stared blankly at him. And age, am I around 16? Since when did beggars keep track of their age? That makes sense. Unlike everything else. Everything about Cho Sam had changed, from the way he spoke to the way he moved. On top of that, he had no idea what was happening around him. It was far too much to be caused by a concussion. Then, what year is it? Beggars count the days. You ever seen a beggar who counted the years? Sounds like a true beggar. Gu Chil rubbed his eyes. A beggar's life was always tired and stressful, but this was so much worse than usual. Then, I have one more question. Gu Chil was seriously troubled. Chung Myung left the tent screaming at the top of his lungs and then came back into the tent speaking more nonsense. I'm going to Mount Hua. Gu Chil just stared at him. This may sound absurd, but hear me out. Gu Chil actually wanted to hear just how absurd it would be. However, that was blown away by Cho Sam's next words. I simply could have left without a word. But I came back to inform you because I know I received some valuable information from you. What a mess. There really wasn't a reason for Gu Chil to listen to a madman's nonsense. But he stuck around because Cho Sam seemed so serious, and he felt bad for him. I will repay kindness twofold and resentment tenfold. There will come a day when I will repay the favor, so remember the name Chung Myung of Mount Hua sect. We will meet again, and I will repay the favor that I owe you. His words sounded nice, at least. It would have been really cool if Cho Sam wasn't bruised black and blue and dressed like a beggar. Crazy talk. Chung Myung's face fell. I know it sounds strange, but remember my words. One day, they'll change your destiny. Wang Cho is looking for you. You're dead if he catches you. Really? They locked eyes. Heh. The world was full of all kinds of people. Someone suddenly reaching new heights wasn't that great or weird in the grand scheme of things. Of course, for it to happen overnight was rather weird and frightening. Well, I need to get going. Come back soon, or he really will beat you to death. I'm going. Anyway, just remember, Chung Myung of Mount Hua. Remember that name. With that, Chung Myung boldly stepped away. Gu Chil shook his head. Life was full of twists and turns, sometimes good and sometimes bad. But if Cho Sam got caught, he really was dead. What am I supposed to tell Wang Cho? Abruptly, the tent flap was thrown open and Chung Myung walked back inside. What? Why was he back again? But Gu Chil didn't get the chance to ask. Ya. Huh? What was that bastard's name? Who? The one who hit me. Ah, Wang Cho? Wang Cho. His real name is Zhangpal. Zhangpal. Sounds like a beggar's name. Tell that bastard. Next time we meet, I won't let him go. In Gu Chil's opinion, Wang Cho was the one who won't let him go. Now I'm really going. Chung Myung strolled out of the tent, whistling. Just as Gu Chil thought everything was settled, Chung Myung popped back into the tent. Ah, what now? Yeah, what? What now? Why again? Which way to Shanxi's Mount Hua? No matter how you sliced it, this bastard was definitely crazy. Chung Myung ran and ran. There was not a single person in the world who would take a little beggar with them all the way to Shanxi province. Unbelievable. His two legs, which were so strong and reliable, felt tired. Even his heart felt weak. Did Chung Myung ever ride a horse or carriage? Never. He could run much faster than a horse ever could, and he wasn't nearly laid back to slow down on purpose. If you added up all the distance he ran in his previous life, you could loop the Central Plains 10 times. That was why he'd started running without a second thought. But he hadn't even really stretched his legs before he was flat on the ground. Hack! Hack! Ah! Ack! Oh God, I'm gonna die at this rate. He couldn't have even imagined such a weak body existed. His two legs had been reduced from steel to sticks and bones, and his untiring heart was reduced to quivers. What nonsense was this? It felt like his heart would jump out of his mouth at any moment. What kind of body is this? He just jumped once? Did he run for an hour or two? No, it was just a couple of minutes, but he was already gasping for breath. Just how bad was this young beggar's body? Ugh. The answers were plainly laid out before him. Putting aside his internal energy, his body alone was in quite a state, literally skin and bones, without an ounce of flesh. And he was planning to go to Shanxi province? A pipe dream. He would keel over from exhaustion before reaching Mount Hua. If he ever made it to the afterlife, his acquaintances would ridicule him. The Plum Blossom Sword Saint, dead from exhaustion? They'd ask. Ha! A mocking laugh escaped from Chung Myung's mouth. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't even stand anymore. Martial artists had great bodies, but this one was simply horrible. Chung Myung didn't know if it would collapse from overworking or overthinking or just plain hunger. He didn't know, so he just laughed. If I'm going to Shanxi province, I need to fix this weak body first. But how was he to change his body? Make it healthy? He already knew the answer. Well, I just need to learn martial arts. A new start. Other people might not realize how incredible a chance this was. Isn't it said that those who fail to reach the top have the most regrets? Well, it was true. Even those who successfully reach the top have their regrets. If only I had done that at that time. If only I'd focused on learning the basics. If only I'd practiced when the master grabbed my ear instead of running away. If only I hadn't gotten caught stealing from the secret alcohol stash. No, forget that last one. Well, I can do it all over again. In the past, Chung Myung was one of the greatest swordsmen in the third generation. However, that didn't mean he was satisfied. Rather, as he got stronger and his understanding of martial arts deepened, he understood better than anyone just how inefficiently he'd practiced and how flawed his foundation was. Foundation. That damned foundation had cost him his Sahyung and Sajae. Chung Myung hated the foundation classes, but he understood why it was so important when he became a disciple. After all, the foundation is what makes a man stand. A tall tower needs a strong foundation. How high the tower rises depends on how the foundation is laid. But young Chung Myung didn't know that. No matter how much his teachers explained, he just didn't understand. Even when he understood it, he couldn't give it his all. Why? Because I'm only human. If Chung Myung was busy digging his foundation, what about the person next to him who'd already built 3 stories? Who wouldn't hurry? Besides, they always told me to concentrate on foundation and basics, but when I did, they just praised the ones ahead of me. Fucking power supremacy. He could understand, though. The masters were only human too. Everyone knew great success came from solid foundations. Still, while students struggled with their foundations, the masters were busy praising the ones with outstanding swordsmanship. That was bearable. Mount Hua taught patience so that students were quite good at containing their emotions. However, the students and masters had drinking parties after evening practice. What if someone starts bragging about their disciple, even at the drinking party? The drunks start bragging about their disciples as if they're one of a kind, and those who have nothing to brag about just have to sit there and take it. That's it. No more patience. The next morning, they take out their frustration on their disciples. My Sajae's disciple is already doing the second formation of Plum Blossom Sword. That rotten man's disciple apparently already tapped into higher internal energy. Not once have I lost to him, but now I'm losing. Whose fault do you think that is? Huh? Answer me. Not enough power. More power. With masters like that, what foundation can be laid? They were too busy trying to show off their students. It was a vicious cycle, where a Sajae's skills were handed down to the disciples. However, the current Chung Myung was different. There was no need to rush. There was no master egging him on. Now that he'd already seen the path he had to climb, he just had to take it one step at a time. Foundations? Others would dig into flat ground, but Chung Myung would tear down mountains. His tower would stand upon an unconquerable peak. The first step is always important. The Dantian and inner Qi. In any body, the Dantian was weak. As one practices, it becomes stronger and better at holding Qi until it can supply the Qi for your martial arts. A well-trained Dantian could be the deciding factor against other martial artists. Simply put, it's like rolling a snowball. Imagine rolling a small snowball down a mountainside. A fingernail-sized ball becomes fist-sized and grows exponentially from there. Soon, it's a colossal avalanche no human power can stop. What Chung Myung needed to do was create a solid Dantian to hold his Qi. That meant he had to find a mountain where the snowball never stops rolling. All right then. Chung Myung looked around carefully before he began. Making a Dantian for the first time was risky. He left town to find somewhere secluded to avoid casualties. It was unlikely someone would get hurt, but why take the risk? Here is good. Chung Myung went into the forest and sat cross-legged under the shade of a large tree. Now, where do I start? There were a lot of things going through his head. All the teachings of Mount Hua, more than a dozen methods of tapping into the Qi. There was the self-healing Qi, the Plum Blossom Heart method, specific to the Plum Blossom Sword, the internal Qi, which would boost one's Qi sevenfold, the regulating Qi, said to contain all forms of energy. The number of methods in his head would boggle most people. If he decided not to limit himself to the teachings of Mount Hua, Chung Myung could learn so much. Yet, Chung Myung didn't even think about it. He knew what technique he had to learn. Equilibrium of 6. For the first time, Chung Myung's voice was clear and confident. What a mess. What was the point of trying to run and fly when you're only capable of crawling? In his past life, Chung Myung didn't want to cling to a technique that didn't show him results either. 100-fold loss. Damn it. It was his single biggest regret. If only he'd completed the equilibrium of 6 instead of switching to a different technique, Chung Myung could have been twice as strong. It was impossible to rebuild your foundation once the tower was built. But, thankfully, he had an opportunity to correct his mistakes. This time, he could complete it with meticulous attention to every detail. His new tower would be even bigger and more beautiful. Humph. With a deep breath, Chung Myung closed his eyes and recalled everything he knew of the equilibrium of 6. As he calmed down, his Qi moved. With every breath, oxygen filled his body and the Qi moved. First-time learners take around 1 month to feel the oxygen moving through their body, but Chung Myung didn't need that time. The energy from the air was guided by the equilibrium of 6 and settled into the lower part of his belly. Now the real work begins. Chung Myung had no intention of loitering at the basic level of the technique. Following the path laid out wasn't bad, but someone who had already walked the path of martial arts could never be satisfied with such a small achievement. A little more. He focused his mind towards filtering out the impurities mixed with the Qi. It was like looking at every single thread in a huge bolt of fabric and gently correcting each misaligned thread. It was perfect. To Chung Myung, the quantity of gathered Qi was irrelevant. What he needed was a one-of-a-kind pure Qi. The Qi began to fade away. From just the size of a millet seed, it became smaller and smaller and smaller. After over half a day, all that was left was a fine sliver of energy. Anyone else would be embarrassed to call this energy a Dantian. Full! Chung Myung finally opened his eyes. His face was bathed with sweat. His rags were drenched with sweat and thick with dust. He was already dirty, but this was on a whole new level. This is my first time doing it with such concentration. Rather than difficult, Chung Myung found it refreshing. He was very pleased with the results, though calling it a Dantian was rather ambiguous. It was weak. If you searched the entire history of martial arts, you couldn't find a weaker Dantian than Chung Myung's. But Chung Myung knew. He'd taken the first step towards the perfect foundation. This little Dantian was the gateway to a whole new world. This mote of pure Qi would roll like a snowball and create an unstoppable landslide. Right? Just like that bastard, the heavenly demon. Chung Myung's body tensed. Even thinking about him made chills run down his spine. He wasn't even human. He was overpowering. No, he was simply beyond words. A group was assembled from the most elite from all the sects. They weren't even after the Heavenly Demon sect. They only wanted one person, the Heavenly Demon himself. The result? Total annihilation. It was no exaggeration to say that the Heavenly Demon had single-handedly beaten the great sects. Perhaps Chung Myung would be like that this time if he did everything right. Okay. Chung Myung leaped to his feet. He managed to stand halfway before he twisted and fell on his face. What? Was he faint from overworking? Kook, he propped himself up on his arms. Or he tried, at least. His arms wouldn't move. Oh, his arms shivered as if they'd been struck by lightning. The sight of his bare arms trembling like twigs made him feel pathetic. Why? What now? This shouldn't be happening. When one learns internal chi, the body should have way more energy. Ooh, wait a moment. Chung Myung turned his gaze to his lower abdomen. The purest chi in the world was gathered, as small as an ant. It was pure enough to satisfy even the Plum Blossom Sword Saint, and it was almost miraculously small. What exactly did that mean? No, damn it. That isn't going to help me use my body right now. How could I forget? Chung Myung clutched his head as he writhed on the ground. He should have thought it through before he created it. Think. Think. Chung Myung, think. His brain was in his head, so why didn't he think? Why didn't he? He could hear Sahyung Jangmun's voice admonishing him. Please think a little. Think. Why don't you use your head when you're doing things for the first time? Why? Your head isn't a decoration. Think. Had he known it would turn out this way, he would have put in a little more thought. I need to go to Mount Hua with this body? How far was Mount Hua? Roughly 2,000 miles? He blinked blearily. 2,000 miles? Any ordinary person would struggle to travel 2,000 miles. But a normal child, no, a beggar with nothing to eat? Chung Myung rubbed his face. This rotten life. But what was he supposed to do? He'd already created his Dantian. It wasn't like he could have created a bigger Dantian even if he'd known. He knew what came from taking shortcuts. No more sacrificing the future for the sake of the present. It was quite a conundrum. Kook! Chung Myung sighed and heaved himself up off the ground. What the hell is this life? All Chung Myung could see were hardships with no end in sight. But hardships forged heroes. There is nothing you can't do with a little persistence. Chung Myung clenched his teeth and hobbled his way to town. Quack! Chung Myung collapsed to the ground. There are things that can't be done with persistence either. And what a time to realize it. Chung Myung had realized that there was a force that could stop him. His legs hurt, but he could tolerate pain. But there was one thing he couldn't tolerate. I'm hungry. Nothing could solve the hunger raging in his empty stomach. Chung Myung wasn't a stranger to hunger, actually. Practice sometimes requires discipline. Eating was an act of accepting external chi, but naturally, the food could contain impure chi too. Therefore, those in search of pure chi forbid themselves from eating. There were times when Chung Myung thought of abandoning his training, but he was a true disciple of Mount Hua, and he was immune to hunger. Well, that was what he thought. Chung Myung had never learned the huge gulf between choosing not to do something and not being able to do something. Extreme hunger cannot be overcome with patience. His stomach felt like it was being attacked from the inside. He managed to get out of the forest and into town, but he couldn't do anything more. He'd practically crawled his way out of the forest. The first life or death crisis I experience after being reborn is starvation. It was a whole new level of absurdity for him. Just who was Chung Myung? One of the greatest swordsmen of the third generation. He was tired and hungry. He was convinced death was just around the corner. He tried to gather chi to become a wild beast, but became a worm instead. No, when he thought about it, his body was on the verge of starvation right from the beginning. He'd only realized once he was on the brink of death. What do I do now? He needed money to get food, and he needed to work to get money. But working in his current state was impossible. Just then, a rustling sound came from somewhere. Equilibrium of 6. Unity. The unity of earth and sky and the 4 cardinal directions, east, west, north, and south. 6. The equilibrium of 6 is the world, and the world is the equilibrium of 6. It sure had a nice ring to it. So, what exactly does that mean in martial arts? It's like one of those worthless items that get tossed out of illegal stores for chump change. It wasn't cheap, but people considered it cheap. It was the cheapest martial arts technique in the world, sold for a price anyone could afford. In short, it's cheap. It was supposed to be the first thing anyone should buy from the bookstore to learn martial arts. Those who don't follow it would end up learning the same thing by self-education. When Chung Myung was very active, the equilibrium of six, right of deliberation, and the three swords were famous. By the time Chung Myung was known as one of the greatest swordsmen of the third generation, the basic techniques of martial arts had revolved around Tai Chi. So why was Chung Myung learning this cheap trick now? Because it's not cheap. Equilibrium of six was one of the introductory techniques of Mount Hua sect. All those who entered Mount Hua were instructed on the equilibrium of six because it could cleanse anyone's body of impurities. Unfortunately, it didn't make your inner chi stronger, it just made you healthier. Those who didn't understand this despised it and cursed it so badly they wanted it removed from the teachings of Mount Hua sect. Inevitably, newcomers to the Mount Hua sect ended up hating the equilibrium of six. But Chung Myung knew better. This was no worthless technique. If it was, Chung Myung never would have made it as far as he did 100 years ago. Everything has a purpose. Equilibrium of six didn't increase strength nor chi. Honestly, when comparing the efficiency of internal chi techniques, equilibrium was less than 1/10 as effective as other techniques. But equilibrium of six was incredible for what it was made to do. The practitioner's body would be perfectly purified. The basis, to put it simply, the foundation, the all-important foundation. It was the best martial arts technique to purify the body, perfect the dantian, and perfect the body itself. However, the effects were never visible to the naked eyes, as people only noticed their dantian when using skills. In the end, even Mount Hua gave up teaching the equilibrium of six. They only taught it in the introductory class because it was tradition, and even then only when asked. What is that? Chung Myung shook his head to clear his mind, only to find something shiny in front of him. Huh? At the same time, the sound of metal clicking could be heard. Tsk, tsk, tsk. He's still so young. How did he end up as a beggar? Clink, clink. Coins started flying towards Chung Myung. It looks like he's been beaten pretty badly. Looks like he'll die soon. Such a terrible world. What a pitiful kid. What? What was happening? Ah, that's right. I'm a beggar, aren't I? I forgot for a second. To everyone else, Chung Myung looked like a beggar. No, he was a beggar in his own eyes too. He was a young child who hadn't reached adulthood yet. He was so severely beaten that his eyes were puffy and blue while blood clotted his open wounds. And such a beggar was lying flat on the street. Ugh, he can't survive without our help. I can't just watch a child suffer like that without help. What sort of person would do such a thing? A raggedy young beggar with underdeveloped limbs and covered in dust seemed to be dying. No, it didn't merely look like he was dying. Chung Myung was really dying. How else could such a perfect beggar scene be witnessed from him? Coin kept flying into view, one after another. Tsk, tsk. No matter how I look at him, he's just a beggar. How did he get here? It seemed like the world still had kindness in it. People were clicking their tongues as they passed by Chung Myung before tossing a few coins in his direction. Looking at the coins that came pouring in, Chung Myung couldn't restrain the tears in his eyes. Oh my, he's crying. Poor thing. It sure is pitiful. Go and buy yourself some noodles with that money. The warmth was too much. However, the reason why Chung Myung was shedding tears wasn't due to the kindness he received. A disciple of the great Mount Hua sect has been reduced to begging. How did he fall so low? Until just a few days ago, he was the greatest swordsman in the world. He risked his life and went to battle Chunma, who was about to usher in a new era of chaos. Before that, he was the most elegant swordsman that roamed the world, but now he was here begging. The world was finding new ways to wound him. I have some pride too. If he accepted the money, then he would truly turn into a beggar. What a beggar he would be. A noble swordsman of the great Mount Hua who earned his living clutching the ankles of others. As if he would actually pick up the money. It was a truly impossible task for Chung Myung. Chung Myung had a warrior's pride. He would never give up. Even when there was a blade about to slit his throat, he refused to bend or break. Chung Myung raised his head while clenching his teeth and shouted, Thank you so much. You will be blessed, sir. His pride was long dead. He had to live. Kia! Chung-myung patted his bulging belly. He looked weird, like a tadpole with a slim body that held no charm and a convex belly. Self-esteem went to drain with the food. Better to live as a beggar than die. Due to his small stature, he couldn't eat much. Just 3 dumplings were enough to make his stomach bulge out. He still had 3 coins left up his sleeve. Coins that he would have never picked up in his past life looked like treasures in this new life. I never would have thought that money was so important. Chung-myung remembered the words of his Sa-hyung, who would always hold his head in agony on the last day of each month. Warriors need to be obsessed with wealth. If possible, Chung-myung wanted to go back to those days and ease his Sa-hyung's suffering. My stomach is actually full. A young beggar was mouthing his complaints off to a ghost. Chung-myung had to keep himself from crying when he thought of his hard-working, money-obsessed Sa-hyung's final moments in the battle with. Anyway, first, I need to live. Chung-myung scratched his head. He left without a plan, and he had no idea how to get to Shanxi. I underestimated how far away 2,000 miles is. Chung-myung began to reflect on his actions. All of his plans revolved around the abilities of his previous body. Even though he knew that his body and the circumstances had changed, it wasn't an easy task to adapt to his new body overnight. In the past, he would have reached Shanxi in half a day. He would have even stopped for a cold drink at an inn beneath Mount Hua, but now, heading to Mount Hua with his deprived body was a risky venture. Even if Chung-myung could defeat any mountain bandits or beasts, there was no way he could overcome hunger. His mind felt burdened as he realized that the journey he expected to be easy turned into an epic journey that could cost him the life he had just regained. But I can't just beg my way to Shanxi. Chung-myung scratched his head, feeling lost. I need to find a way, but I need to understand what I need to find a way. He wasn't aware of it when he first awoke, but 100 years had passed since his era. It was no exaggeration to say that Chung-myung had no idea how the current world worked. But how should he go about finding out? Hey, an average person would take more than 2 months to get to Shanxi. It wouldn't be too strange to believe that, with Chung-myung's frail body, it could take up to half a year to reach Mount Hua. Hey! It was horrifying and frustrating for Chung-myung, who desperately wanted to see Mount Hua's condition with his own eyes. He had to find a way, but right now, not a single thing came to his mind. Hey, you bastard! You deaf or something? Huh? Chung-myung turned his head. What now? He heard everything clearly, but he didn't think that someone would be calling for him. There was no reason why anyone would talk to a beggar. 3 beggars were glaring down at him with ugly faces. They looked like beggars. His current life seemed to be intertwined with beggars in many ways. Me? You? Who else could I be calling? What the hell is wrong with you? The ugly beggar standing in front of Chung-myung spat on the floor. I don't know what hole you crawled out from, but who gave you permission to beg here? Was permission needed to beg? You're still a child, so I'll spare your life. Take out everything you have, including the money you have hidden in your sleeve, and leave this place. The remainder of Chung-myung's limited funds were stashed in his sleeves and in his hands. Chung-myung looked down at his hand. They were the leftovers, the cold dumplings. You people have no conscience. You bastards. Take this away? This little bit of food too? What was he supposed to eat? You beggar. Whoa, a beggar was cursing at another beggar for being a beggar. It felt like he was spitting on his own face. Wait a minute. Chung-myung carefully placed the dumplings to the side. He then stood up, stretched his hand forward a couple times, took a step ahead, then 1 step behind, and repeated that several times. The beggars, who were watching the strange scene, rolled their eyes. What are you doing now? Ah, wait just a moment. I'll be done soon. After stretching his arms and legs a couple more times, Chung-myung got up. It's not entirely perfect, but this should be enough. After his odd routine, Chung-myung had managed to get a sense of distance and understand the length of his reach. Even with his short limbs, he managed to adapt. So, you guys are about to be very upset. I have a grudge against beggars. What? Don't you understand what I'm saying? Well, that's just how the world is. It's messed up. Don't be too pissed off. Just accept it and move on. What is this bastard talking about? Chung Myung cracked his neck. Ah, by the way, I can't hit very hard because my body is weak, so you're gonna get hit a whole lot to make up for it. This crazy. At that moment, Chung Myung lunged ahead and punched the face of the beggar standing at the front. Ack! A proper step. A fully extended fist that gathered strength through the gentle rotation of the waist, utilizing strongly grounded legs. Chung Myung's fist slammed right into the beggar's face, and the sound was like slamming a bamboo stick against a wall. Thud! The beggar who got hit with the unexpected blow silently collapsed on the spot. Seeing that, Chung Myung smiled. You! Puck! He kicked another beggar. I am Plum Blossom Sword Saint of the Great Mount Hua, you bastards! At that moment, all his accumulated resentment after reincarnation exploded. Esteemed sir. Does a beggar look like an esteemed sir? Great beggar? Should I hit you again? The beggars, who had their asses handed to them, whined. Where did this monster come from? It hurts so much that I could die. A couple hits were all it took for Chung Myung to subdue these beggars. It was shocking that a child knocked out 3 grown adults, and it was clearly a disastrous result for the 3 of them. It's going to take some time to get used to this body. It didn't take much to subdue them. But if he had been in his previous body, he would have turned them into rice cakes with just 1 finger. But now he had to kick, run, roll, and even punch to subdue the beggars. One of them kept getting up after every hit, so Chung Myung had to slap him 38 times. That Jongpal? Chopal? Whatever it was, that bastard should also be taught like this. Just thinking about him made Chung Myung gnash his teeth. If only he had known how short his new limbs were in advance. If only he had the stamina to get up after being beaten, he could have beaten Pal Cho. He was in a hurry to get back to Mount Hua, so he couldn't even take revenge. One day, however, he would definitely catch that beggar and teach him a lesson. Men. Yes! The 3 beggars jumped up. Sweat trickled down their face. All 3 of them looked at Chung Myung. No matter how I see it, he looks like a beggar who couldn't even lift a bag of rice. This makes no sense. Totally incomprehensible. Small, weak, and thin. On the surface, he looked weak and frail. No one expected that he could fight so fiercely. So when they got close, they ended up seeing stars. Their fists never even touched Chung Myung's clothes. Chung Myung wasn't very fast or strong, so why did they lose to him? Hey! Yes! Please give your orders. Esteemed sir. No esteemed beggar. Ah, no! What's the point in understanding? It takes time to convince someone, but beating them is quick. The only important thing was that the young beggar's punches hurt like hell. Chung Myung glanced at the beggars and opened his mouth. I am just asking, do you know how to reach Shanxi quickly? The beggars looked at each other and smiled. Chung Myung began to feel like there was some hope when he saw their expressions. Ha ha ha, you are asking something obvious. Oh, really? If we knew something like that, why would we be begging? At least ask something worthwhile. Chung Myung looked at the beggars and sighed deeply. These guys weren't wrong. At the very least, it was his mistake to seek a path from a beggar. Enough. Go away. Thank you. Be strong. The beggars bowed their heads and turned around, ready to run away. No, they tried to run away. Hold it. At that moment, Chung Myung's words froze them in place. Yes? It is fine to flee, but take out everything in your hands and pockets and leave them here. You came up behind me while I was eating, so 1 coin. No, 10 coins. Trust me, it is better than getting hit again. Realizing how sincere he sounded, the beggars relinquished the coins in their pockets and quickly escaped. You? Yes? Take off everything aside from your underwear before I take them off for you. It was a horrific scene where a beggar was being robbed in daylight. That's the end of episode 1. Thank you all for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe to support me.